Borada, good morning, everyone. Shemai Croiso. It's wonderful to see so many people here. I'm Catherine Fuchs, Director of the Women's Equality Network Wales, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our partnership event for Black History Wales 365, in partnership with Black History Wales 365 and Race Council Cymru. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce the wonderful Uzo Iwobi. First of all, please do feel free to tweet during this event using the hashtag WenCafe, and do tag in at Race Council Cymru and at WEN Wales. Please, can you keep your mics off for now until we come to the Q&A session a bit later. Feel free to use the chat button to introduce yourself or to share any interesting links you may have that are pertinent to the topic, and we'll be doing the same as people speak. We're going to share some of their information. And as you can see, this event is being recorded, and we will be sharing it with our members and putting it out there so other people can access the wonderful discussion we're going to have. So WEN Wales, just before I start, WEN Wales is, our vision is a Wales free from gender discrimination, and we're a membership organisation. We'd love you to join us, because when we all join together, our voice is stronger and we can have a greater impact. So thank you. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the wonderful Professor Uzo Iwobi, OBE, who is founder of Race Council Cymru. Over to you, Uzo.
Shemai Croiso, Wales. Welcome, Wales and the world. We are so excited to have you with us, and we are delighted that you're joining us. And we've got amazing panelists today representing the heart and soul of Black history here in Wales. So starting with the fantastic Gaynor Legall, who is the chair of the Heritage and Cultural Centre, and also the chair of the First Minister's Monuments Committee, and the second Black female councillor in Wales. And followed, we have the next panelist is our lovely Humie Webbe, known as the jazz voice from heaven. I think a BAME contributor to part of the committee that Welsh Government, the Minister for Education, has set up to review BAME contributions in the curriculum, working with Professor Charlotte Williams, and also is a founding member of Black History here in Wales, and also forms part of the Black History Management Committee and lead on equalities at the National Training Federation Wales. And last but not the least is our fabulous Rachel Campbell Clarke. Well, she says not double barrel, Rachel Clarke, but is the granddaughter of our wonderful patron and lead, Betty Campbell, and she's going to be talking to us today about her grandma. So she also is a deputy head in a London university and the supervisor of all the Black Lives Matter Wales collective. So welcome, panelists, and right away we power away into the questions that we have for today. So I'm going to come to you first, Gaynor. Can I ask you about Betty? Betty Campbell obviously paved the way for many Black head teachers and leaders in Wales, not just in education. What do you think she would make of where we are today with Black Lives Matter and the fact that there is still no Black woman elected to the Senedd?
Well, I've thought about what Betty would make of the Black Lives Matter movement a couple of times when I've been on demos. Betty didn't join demonstrations, so I don't think she would have been out there demonstrating. What she would have been done was supporting some of the young people in what they want to do. She most certainly would have been giving them advice about what they should do and how they should be doing it. And I think because Betty talked a lot about discrimination that was based on skin color. she felt very strongly about that because she faced a lot of racism, discrimination because of the colour of her skin, not to mention where she lived and where she grew up. So she would probably be thinking about time too, but I don't know whether she would completely agree with the methods being used. In terms of what's come after Betty, her representation, her leadership, well, sadly, there are still, as far as I know, no black head teachers in Wales, and there are very few black teachers in Wales. The last time I looked, which was some time ago, about a year ago, I was doing something about education. There were only 12 black teachers in the whole of Wales. So she would have been very disappointed in that. And I think that's why this discussion is really pertinent. And because we need to be addressing the deficits in education in Wales. I think that in terms of leadership and inspiration outside of the field of education, outside of the field of schools rather, Betty was also very active in the university setting. So she made some differences there. She changed the way that they viewed black students. I think that Betty being there, those of you who knew Betty will know that she wasn't backwards in coming forward when she had something to say. And she said what she had to say wherever she was. And I think that seeing people like that who are willing to speak up, give courage to those who are a bit more timid. So she inspired lots of different people, I think, in lots of different ways.
Thank you so much, Gaynor. Brilliant. And now over to you, Rachel, Betty's granddaughter. Can you tell us a little bit about Betty and growing up with her as your grandma? How did that feel? And what kind of influence has she had on you?
Well, yeah, morning everyone. I'd like to say I completely agree with what Gaynor's just said. Nan wasn't backwards in coming forwards at all. She did speak her mind, and for me that was just normal because she was who I had a really close, strong relationship with. Because my mum had a really strong relationship with her mother, and when my nan's mum was around, I know that she had a really strong relationship with her, and that sense of community and that those strong intergenerational links that were cross families. It wasn't just about that one family, my own family. I know that in the Bay in Butetown that those links are really, really strong, and that also supported her success. But for me, that was all normal. I thought that everybody had this, and lots of people say, oh, you know, how does it feel to be the granddaughter of someone who achieved so much? And I would say it just feels normal because that's what I knew. That was normal. That was just Nan. But what I loved was her passion for fairness, her passion for justice. And I again agree with Gaynor. I don't think she'd necessarily be out protesting, but she would be supporting, she would be demanding that people in positions of authority and power listen. And she wasn't afraid of using her voice. And I think that that's another key thing that I've taken and also taken for granted. As Black women, and being a woman is significant in this case, as Black women in particular, I feel that often our voice isn't provided the platform discussion. I also feel that as Black females, at times we are afraid to speak, and we don't really feel listened to. And that isn't just around men, that can also be around women of other minorities and ethnicities too. And that is something that that I will call her Nan, everyone else calls her Betty Campbell or Mrs. Campbell, but that's something that Nan wasn't ashamed of and afraid to do. And that inspiration, I guess, and that part of her legacy is something that lives with me. And I know it inspires lots and lots of people also. I enjoyed great arguments with her. And we'd go backwards and forwards all the time on various issues, but essentially we agreed on the same things, and we believe in the same things, and I think that's also what supported me to get into education. So I'm deputy head teacher in London, and working with lots of young people, and I also go around and support schools and do some school improvement work also, and I think that does come from her. So yeah, in lots of ways, but she was just normal. It's just a normal experience for me. I'm very fortunate.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Now over to you, Humie. What other role models have inspired you in education? So who else should we see a statue of?
I had to think really hard about this question, and I'm not sure I have the answer that you're looking for, because in terms of role models in education, I am now in my 62nd year. So growing up in Ely, we didn't have or see many role models. But the person who I suppose was my main role model growing up was my mother, because she came to the Caribbean, from the Caribbean in the 1950s, late 1950s, and she was a teacher in the Caribbean. She wasn't a teacher when she came to Wales. She wasn't given the opportunity to be a teacher, but all that talent that she had for teaching and supporting, she levied to her children. And so my mother taught us all to read before the age of 5. So we were already reading before we went to school. I was already a acquisitive person and bombarded my mother with questions of why was this and why was that. And my mother was somebody who didn't, she wasn't what you would call an avid converser. She was a very quiet person, but she was very knowledgeable and very wise, all of which you don't realize until very late in life. So in growing up, my mother was my main sort of educator. However, growing up, we also were very much supported by our church. We had really good educators within the church, and we were brought up in the Methodist church. And also I was privileged enough to be in a primary school in the heart of Ely, which looking back now was a very inclusive school. And we had a wonderful head teacher called Mr. Bernard Cook. And anything anybody wanted to do, he would do the best to support him. So he was a very keen rugby player, and he was a very keen musician. He could play about 7 instruments. And if somebody wanted to play an instrument, he would teach them himself if he couldn't find anybody to teach. And if girls wanted to play rugby, they could play rugby. Boys wanted to play rugby, do swimming or do knitting or whatever people wanted to do. He was a very progressive teacher. I'm talking about early 60s. And then growing up, I suppose when I had my son, the person that I looked to, and when I came to Buttown, I we've all said it is Betty Campbell. And I had the privilege to see Betty in action on lots of occasions in the school. And I think if it wasn't for Betty, I wouldn't be doing what I do now, because we came to Buttown when my son was 6 months old. And Betty paved the way for me to be involved in the Residence Society, the carnival, setting up the choir, and all these things that I was involved in. Betty paved the way for me to be involved in. And so looking back, there are 2 main models, my mother and post my son, Betty. Where we are now, as people have already alluded to, there are very few people that we can look at in terms of education as people who are looking like us and doing great things. So if I was talking about a statue, I would rather look at those organisations who have paved the way for us to do what it is that we do. So I'm talking about, in terms of Cardiff, we've got Black History, the Bhutan History and Arts Centre, and the work that Gaynor is doing to continue that. The monumental central force, there was Mount Stewart School, in terms of the heritage and the legacy that Betty left within that school. And then you're talking about also organisations, people who are developing things around race equality, I think. So rather than maybe people, I would sort of look at those institutions that paved the way for others, such as, you know, I know it's no longer here, but Black Voluntary Sector Network Wales, which was the sort of founding institution that created the Black History Wales 365 movement that is now. So all that recognition sometimes is levied to individuals, but those individuals are part of a wider network. And I would like to see those sort of institutions recognised.
Okay, thank you so much, Humie. Quite a lot to think about there. Right, I'm going to open up the questions now. If I could ask everybody to speak for 1 minute each and be very, very brief, that would be helpful. So what do you, as panelists, think needs to change in education in Wales to ensure that we have, that is fit for purpose? And I know that many of us here signed up to the petition to ensure that Black history is compulsory as part of the school curriculum, that this is a must, but what else needs to change? So panelists, who wants to go first?
Can I go first, please? Yes. Well, for me, one of the first moves is to stop calling it Black history. It is history. Yeah, it's the history. And it is a history that contains us rather than a history that ignores us. And I think that if we stop using the term Black history, we stop othering ourselves and going along with people who think we're trying to rewrite history. We are not. We're expanding on history and adding to it the bits and the pieces and the people who were ignored and left out. That's the first thing I would do. One of the other things I meant to say was when I was young, in the early 60s, late 50s, we had the Ebony magazine from the Yanks who came, and those magazines, Betty used to read it. They used to be passed all around Butetown. And in those magazines, for the first and only time in our lives, we saw other Black people. We saw people in positions of authority and power and achieving, and ordinary people. We don't have anything like that in Wales. And I think I agree with what Humie was saying in terms of statues, but we need to find a way that educates people outside of the education establishment about what we have done, what we are doing, and the changes we've already brought. And I think it would help to get more support. So for me, changes in education ought not to focus just on school, because education doesn't stop, should not stop for anyone.
Thank you so much, Gaynor. Any other thoughts? Let's come to you, Rachel. You're on mute.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, you think I'd know this by now. I hear what Gaynor is saying. What I'm really passionate about just calling it history. It's just the truth. It's just the broadened truth, as opposed to a narrow dialogue and diet that we've all had in the Welsh education system, but in the British education system overall. So that does need to change. I'm really passionate about making sure that the educators are educated. Now, when I did my teacher training, which was a PGCE 1-year course, I think we had one lecture on diversity. that was given by or led by somebody who was meant to be this great authority in and on diversity, and it was actually ended up by being a racist lecture, which I complained about. Now, I went to the Institute of Education in London, which is one of the top teacher training institutions. I was one of 6 Black students out of a cohort of 210. Everybody else on there was white. And I complained to the person running the course, and she didn't really take me seriously. I emailed the person who gave the lecture, outlined my concerns and the damage that this lecture could then do. And it really wasn't taken that seriously. So for me, I think that we do need to add more truth to our history curriculum in schools. But I think unless we also educate the people who are educating the future generations, we're going to have the same old dynamics reappear, and that structural racism is still going to be in place. So that's what I'd like to focus on.
Thank you. And finally to you, Humie.
Yes, I agree with what's been said, because I can echo similar experiences of Rachel when I have entered into higher education, in particular when I was doing my master's. I was I think I was the only person of colour from Wales doing a full-time master's course in Wales. Everybody else was an international student, apart from me. Other people who were on the course who were Black were doing it as a part-time basis. I was the only one in a cohort of 300 doing a course. So, and I'm talking about maybe 10 years ago. But like people said, I would like to see educators being educated, because I have also been witness to people who have in course, they'll do an equality and diversity mandatory module and employ people who are less than qualified to teach that. And I too have challenged. And I suppose I was lucky in the fact that when I did challenge at one point, when I was doing my first degree, I was offered the chance to deliver the session myself, which I did. And I used the medium of music and music education, and looking at the discrimination of female artists had suffered over the period of years. And I used lots of different examples of how people stereotype and how people other our communities. So I think if we're talking about what needs to be done, is different ways to teach history. You know, as Gaynor said, it's not just Black history, it's history. It's about our stories and how we communicate those stories and how people listen and interpret those stories.
Yes.
You know, so I think that's really important.
Thank you so much. Now, it's interesting because hearing Gaynor talk about, let's stop calling it Black history, I have heard people raise concerns about the obliteration of Black contribution and the Black, the impact of Black awareness in Wales. And so the concept of history in a society that is inclusive is certainly something that everybody will want to see. But what happens when the word Black is dropped? What could potentially happen is we mainstream it and we totally all disappear. But until more is done to align it, that then gives us the confidence and trust to say, yeah, it's expanding. So now we can say it's history. The history is of the peoples of Wales. And there is a strong point that you make, Gaynor. Maybe that should be another WEN Cafe conversation point. Should we drop Black out of the Black history in Wales? That would be great. So the next question now, so what does an inclusive curriculum look like? We have 3 minutes, so I'm just going to come to each of you for 1 minute. And if you were the first Minister of Wales and you could wave a magic wand, what is the one thing you think could deliver true equality in education? So I'll come to you first, Gaynor. 1 minute, please. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. Sorry. Okay.
Yes, sorry. What could deliver? I don't know where to start. There is so much wrong. Where do you start? But one of the key issues for me is the way in which the Welsh Government and local authorities employ and recruit. And I think if we could change that, then we would have more black teachers, because it's not that they're not there and they're not qualified and they don't have the skills and the talent. It's them getting a start. I think that if we had more black people working in policy development, not necessarily because you're black, you understand not all skin is kin, you know, but we'd have a better chance of changing the way that policies are developed across the spectrum, because the people who are drafting policies live in a very narrow lifestyle, and we need to have people with wider experiences developing the way we work. So I think I'd start, if I want to change, by changing the employment and recruitment practices of all the public sectors in Wales.
Thank you. Humie, let's go to you, Humie.
I agree with Gaynor. I think it starts with how people are perceived and how people are recruited, and how they are, how the notion of talent is interpreted when people come to you and as an advisor, an informal advisor, and then when employment is attached to it, for some reason you're not making the grade or that particular criteria. And I have seen this time and time again. And a brief example is, well, I won't go into that brief example, but there are things happening now in terms of how people perceive contributions from people from different backgrounds and different communities. They welcome the door, they welcome, and then the structures do not change in terms of how they recruit or you're welcomed into that space. So it does start with that recruitment practice. There has to be better ways in which people are able to shine and demonstrate their talents, especially when we know there are people who have the abilities to occupy those higher positions.
In fact, it also it transcends just recruitment, it's retention and progression, because many people come and stay at a very low level. Over to you, final minute, and I've been very good. 11:30. One last minute, Rachel.
I guess it just sums up what both Humie and Gaynor have said already, which is, it would be great if we can move to a leadership that can say they're anti-racist, not saying, well, we're just going to pay lip service to trying to make things equal and fair, but actively talking about anti-racism, which does include policy reviews, practices, procedures, training to be rolled out. It looks at the teacher recruitment and retention and progression, as you were saying. It also makes sure that we do have the right people in the right places, but that the voices of minorities are actually listened to and are actually heard. And you can only do that if you fully understand the interplay between whiteness and power, and how that is threaded through every single aspect of our society. And definitely through education. You just need to look at the outcomes of all children and look at the different ethnicities and the different outcomes, and who has the strongest outcomes and who has the weakest. And unfortunately, despite the huge contributions made, despite a presence in this country, in Wales, for a long period of time, the outcomes are not as strong as they are for white students. So there is something that's fundamentally wrong. And I think the policy and procedural change and systemic change essentially is what needs to happen, if I had a magic wand.
Absolutely. Wow, we could talk forever. Over to you, Catherine. Thank you for inviting us, and over to you for questions.
Thank you so much, panelists, for your contributions. I think you've opened our eyes and raised some really interesting points that I certainly hadn't thought of. Gaynor's point, for example, about Black History Month, and that's actually othering. It should really be our history, our joint history of Wales, includes all the people who live in Wales, and there shouldn't be another name. So I think those points have been really interesting and illuminating. And it's just been wonderful to hear about Betty Campbell as well, and hear about her legacy, and to meet you, Rachel. Anyway, I don't want to take up space because this is WEN Cafe, and we've got, I'm sure, some questions from our audience. So can anyone who wants to ask a question make themselves known? I can't see everybody's hand, so maybe just unmute yourself if you would like to make a comment or ask a question.
Hi, Catherine. I might sneak in first. Is that allowed?
Okay, go for it.
Let me put my camera on because I don't like talking when you can't see me. Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm chair of WEN Wales and I'm CEO of Sport Wales. Thank you so much, panelists, for coming and giving your time and your knowledge and expertise. 2 questions, if I may. First one, to all the panelists, I suppose, is around, you know, we've got a campaign around diversity, 50-50 campaign, and you raised the point around leadership, and I really feel until we can see diversity within leadership across Wales, we're going to continue to not make the progress that we should be. So I'd love to know your thoughts on how we could progress that quicker, because I think we need it. And the second one is a little sneaky one. I'd love to know, maybe from Rachel, what do you think Betty would be saying now about her statue going up in Central Square?
Great, thank you. Let's go to Rachel first, and then we'll go to Uzo.
Okay, I'll do the easiest one first. So I think she'd say, oh, that's good. Although I've only done what I thought has been the right thing to do. I haven't done it for a statue. She'd be pleased that there's a statue, but that wouldn't be the driving factor behind her joy. Her joy was seeing other people achieve, succeed, and surpass at times their own expectations. But you know, she'd probably say something like, "Oh, at least when people go shopping, they can see me as they go past with their bags," or something like that. But she didn't do anything for the recognition of doing it. She did it because it was the right thing to do, and she believed in people, and there are many people who can attest to that. So yeah. So that's that one. In terms of your first question, which I guess is the hardest one, I would say, and what I've been talking to different places about, is thinking about equity more than equality. So making sure that you acknowledge that for certain members of society, they're going to be more likely to be in certain positions. And now I know our Equalities Minister has downplayed white privilege and made it illegal for people to talk about that in schools, and who knows what her story is. I think she's incredibly confused. However, we have to acknowledge that there is a privilege, and it's not a monetary one, but it's a life chances one, and it's a quality of life one. And we need to move to a place of equity, and it means that for other communities, and in particular people who are from and of the Black diaspora, actually the outcomes in Wales, their outcomes across the UK are not as strong. So what leadership pathways can be put into place to support people? Where's your organisation going to select people from? And once they're in, do you have really clear conversations with them about how they can progress in your organisation? Or is it, well, you're here, now it's on you to do really well, even though I know and you know that you might not know the secret codes of how to get along, you know? It's those sorts of conversations that we've shied away from as a society, but I think now's the time where people are more open to doing something about it. But yeah, equity before equality.
I totally back what you're saying. Yesterday, I interviewed an incredibly powerful woman on Leadership on the Hot Seat, and she's a lawyer. in Canada, and her name is Neka McGregor. Check her out. And she runs an organization called Women at the Center. She wrote an anti-racism package for organizations that is trending across Canada. We're hoping to invite her here to Wales, to Welsh government. Honestly, she talks very, very clearly about the need to step up first and foremost to be anti-racist, not non-racist, because there is a difference. One is passive, where you do nothing and say nothing, but you just don't treat people badly. But anti-racism actually requires you to engage and do something about it. There is an action. It's an intention, a declaration that is backed up by action. And in terms of your question, Sarah, talking about recruiting somebody, you're looking at people from diverse ethnic backgrounds. Their cultures are different. The values on which they were raised are different. Their experiences, their life journeys are different. Most Black people that I know who live in Wales today have faced racism in one way or the other. So they're coming into an all-white organization, looking at you thinking, oh my gosh, I'm in a strange place, somebody help. They might not say it, but inside you're thinking, gosh, I stand out. I stand out. What would you say that organizations that are mainstream, who have white privilege, are doing to ensure that they create an enabling and conducive culture for people to thrive, to include people who are different? Because what happens is you recruit really highly talented people, place them in what they may consider or feel or perceive to be a hostile climate, and they shrivel and die, literally not because they're not good enough, but because the environment and the culture within the organization is perfectly suited to white people thriving. So we have to be more purposeful in thinking about equality, in thinking about inclusion, and in thinking about equity, actually, because equality doesn't always result in fairness. If we say, right, I have no sight and somebody has sight, you say to both of us, welcome, beautiful building, excellent, there's the ice cream machine, help yourself and walk away. One person can go get ice cream, the other will need support or assistance or particular needs that need to be met to be able to get that ice cream. So that is equality for you. Equity is based on individual needs, and we want to focus on equality of outcomes, not equality of what you do or process, but equality. What do you need to do to bring two people to the same successful outcome where we all have recruitment, retention, progression? So we really need to be thoughtful about how to be inclusive and how to make it. I'll give you an example. In an organization I worked in before, I'm in the current best job ever. I will shout out about the Deputy Minister and Chief Whip. She is the best boss I've ever had in my life. But before that, I worked in an organization where I used to come in with Nigerian food, and I'd go to warm it in the microwave. They'd say, stinks. We don't want this kind of food brought into the workplace. That was a colleague. What is this? And it was just yam and vegetable. Oh, it's a very strange smell. But the same individual brings a boiled egg sandwich to work, which stinks out the room. But you say nothing because this is what people eat here. So why can't we be included? Even things as simple as that.
Can I come in and, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll shut up.
Can I just answer the question Sarah raised, is what do we do to improve diversity? And I have grown to hate two phrases, BAME and diversity. I've been active in politics and community development for over 50 years now. And every time there is a move that supposedly is about seeking equality, Black people lose out. Back in the 80s, with the women's movement, middle-class white women benefited more than any other. So we keep, I have described it as the same tune, a different dance around, that is racism. And we're giving it different names. And the problems for me are that institutions, organizations, bureaucracies, etc., call it different, give it a different name, but they carry on the same way. And the beneficiaries tend to be the same people, and the losers tend to be exactly the same people. So say it as it is. What is it you want to do? Because I don't understand what diversity is. You know, be clear about it. Because when you're clear about what it is you want to do and what you want to change, you are clearer about what you have to do. And it's not just about organizing the chairs and putting up posters and, you know, having multicultural food, whatever that is. It's about actually thinking differently about the way your organization is ordered, about the structures in your organization and the way that you deliver your services, not just to the people outside of your organization, but the people who work for your organization as well. So stop using blanket terms, be specific, be targeted, and make real change.
Could I briefly address Sarah's question?
Yeah, go for it, Humie. I'll mute and you answer.
Yes, okay. If I understand, Sarah, is it Sarah or Sarah? Sarah, yeah. You asked first about leadership, what leaders could do, and then about what we can do around diversity. Is that the question?
Yes.
I think in terms of leadership, people who are in managerial positions, CEOs, directors, they have to be honest with themselves as to what it is, as Gaynor said, what it is they want to do and why they want to do it. In my experience, I have found that those CEOs or directors who fully embrace what needs to be done get it done. Those who don't just come round and round asking the same questions, because there is something that people bring to the table besides their position. They bring their values, they bring their beliefs, they bring their tolerances. People need to be honest in those managerial leadership roles, how much or how little they are able to tolerate. And when I say tolerate, is how open will you be to embracing a person who is maybe different, has different views, who may challenge you, who will challenge the system, who will challenge the thing. So many times I have been in that position where I am the first person of colour to be employed in a senior role, the first person to be in taking the organisation into a new direction, and all those positions have been because somebody has bucked the trend or seen something past my skin colour. However, being just that person who sees behind that skin colour is also, it's about what are you going to do to support that person who is charged with being the lead equality or the lead whatever it is, or the lead engagement person. Because very often I've also heard that when somebody who leads on a particular relevant piece of work, when that person is gone, that work goes with them. Or they say, oh, that was Humie's work, that was, and then they start all over again and get funding again. And so really, for yourself, Sarah, or for any other CEO, if you want real change and you're talking about whatever the word term is, being more inclusive, you have to have a conversation with yourself, as they say in the Black community. Have a conversation with yourself and set your tolerances. What kind, because that will guide you in terms of where you place your organization, how you support your staff, and how you move forward or not. And the reason why we have these circular conversations is because people have not been honest about why they're opening those doors. They open in the doors and they either close them quick or they open them a little bit. So I think that's really important. You need to be honest.
Thank you, Humie. Thank you for your answer. It's given us all food for thought, and it's very clear from all our panelists that action is needed, and it's better to do specific things than say we're going to do an action plan around something and spend a long time doing it. Let's just put in place, say, I agree with Gaynor, use the language, say what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, and just do it. But I want to come to Audrey West, please. Audrey's got a question, so go for it, Audrey. I'll mute and you unmute.
Good morning, everyone. It's brilliant to be here. I'm new to Wales. I've been here 3 years now, and so I'm from Jamaica, grown up in London since I was a child. And I've got a lot to say about education, so I will try to be brief. But what I will say is that I do lots of different things. I'm a trained teacher and a psychotherapist and an artist and so on. And with the work I do, I keep referencing my blackness or my community's blackness one way or the other. Now, I was on in 1986, I was on a TV program about Black women artists, and Stuart Hall was on that program, and he prophesied to say, now that the GLC is going, there will be no more provision for Black profiling and Black artists. And the GLC was very specific about addressing racism in London at the time. It taught racism awareness, it was obligatory and so on. And people started to get more assertive and more woke, Black people and white, but it became threatening. And it was, systematically shut down. I appreciate being in Wales because I see a goodwill towards addressing issues of inequality, for want of a better word. But I think there's a lot of confusion because a lot of people don't understand what racism is because we no longer have the narrative to unpack it. So within the classroom, because I've also taught, children will say to me, Miss, they've been racist, when they're either pinching him or saying that, they've taken something from them or something like that. Children don't understand, teachers often don't understand, but there's a guilt factor that goes with the word. I have worked in so many agencies since who do not understand. I was at Kids Company, the organisation didn't understand racism because it's not unpacked. Where I see racism starting is from the transatlantic enslavement of African people because they were African and Black, and we have kept that narrative, we've been pushed back into that boat frequently because we are Black, and the word Black is what we were called. Anything Black is bad, denigration tells you the word. That's where we're at. Now, can we please start to unpack what the word Black means? Because if we're trying to do equality, we will never understand what we're unpacking if we don't know where it started, which is where history comes in. But Blackness didn't start with slavery. Black African people started off as very powerful people, and our power has been taken away from us because we were strong. Now, I don't want to say any more because I will keep going on and on, but the points that we're saying here, I see some strong Black women, and I honour strong Black women, and our voices are often the ones that are not heard because they're threatening. And the system cannot bear to be threatened by Black. Now, we're in a state of the nation and internationally where that can move on, but we really need to learn to understand what we mean about who we are. We're all humanity from my point of view. We've all got skills from my point of view, and we need to honour those skills. I totally agree with the argument so far about unpacking diversity, unpacking the labels. We don't need those labels because they hold us back, but we need a way to describe ourselves that remain human and valuable.
Can I just say something, Catherine, very important? My definition of, the best definition of Black for me personally, came from the Black Police Association. And they define Black as one that emphasizes the common experience and determination of people of African Caribbean, Middle Eastern, Asian, or Asian subcontinent origin to oppose the effects of racism and victimization. That for me is the definition of Black that I It's not a color. Many people think it's a color. And honestly, I've hardly met anybody who's black, pitch black, I mean. So it is not a color, just as white people are not really white. White is a sheet. Behind you, Catherine, you have the white background against the WEN Wales thing. And it's a different shade to your skin. More white people are actually pink, or, you know, different colors. You have different shades of brown. So for me, when I went to that training with the Black Police Association, when I worked in the police sector, that for me was a definition of black that I agreed with. Over.
Can one of the other panelists, Gaynor, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I urge you all to read 2 books. Frans Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask, and Bobby Seale, Seize the Time. If you're looking for definitions of blackness and blackness in terms of pride and power, read those 2 books.
I'd just like to comment on what Audrey said, because I agree. When you're talking about what people consider to be blackness or race, there is an origin as to why people have attributed that particular colour to our communities. And for those of you who know Glenn Jordan, when I was working for the National Museum of Wales, Glenn did a very powerful talk on where this term came from and why it is used in modern day, because we are not a black race. There is no such thing as a black race. It was a term that was described to other us from the conquerors, the people who came in, and so our skin colour was a difference to them. It has had various connotations over the years, but now when you're talking about black in modern terms, people have reclaimed the term, and so there is a sense of pride. However, what Audrey is talking about, I feel, is about where the origins came from in terms of why we are considered other than somebody who is not of that particular skin colour. And it was a really powerful narrative that Glenn prepared that gave us that context as to why we are considered a darker hue, if you want to call us. One of the politicians said people of a different hue. Then it's having that background as to why we are, how we're here now, and attributing those terms. So I think it's a really interesting conversation, maybe that we can't have now, but it's just to put into context what I think is really relevant in terms of what Audrey said.
Thank you, Humie. Can I come to Rachel next? And then I'm going to update you. I had some information from Helen Molyneux, Monumental Welsh Women, on the statue, and I just wanted to update everyone on that. But Rachel, over to you if you'd like to respond to Audrey's point.
Yeah, I think it's such a complex discussion point, and I think it's one that many people are reflecting on now. I don't think we can talk about it in 30 seconds or however long is left, because within lots of definitions of blackness and the black community, and that term is thrown around, and essentially it is used to support the othering and to essentially mean non-white. In my experience, that's how people have used it. But within that broad group, I mean, at the moment we have BAME as being the latest term, but there's so much colorism at play, and what happens is that using these really broad terms implies to everybody that our lived experiences are all the same, and they're not. We've got very different experiences because we have different histories, because of different things that have taken place and happened over hundreds and hundreds of years. So I agree. I think it might be worth having this as a separate talking point and a discussion to give it the time and the value that's needed. But I think it's quite dangerous to use collective terms that support and reinforce the othering, but also indicate that being Black or having a Black identity means that your experience is the same as another brown person's, because that just is not the case. And we can see that again with our current equalities in terms of the UK government equalities minister, and also our Home Secretary Priti Patel. So we're not going to go into it, but they're two very clear examples as to why it's dangerous to use this one term for everybody.
Just to clarify, please, when Rachel speaks about
the UK government, not the Welsh government,
not our Welsh government.
No. But sorry, yeah, thank you, Uzo. But the reason why I said that is because they're two clear examples. And so if anybody is confused about what colorism means and why using the term BAME is problematic, then please have a look.
Yeah, I understand, Rachel. Have a look at those individuals and what they've said. I understand what you're saying, and they're very much part of the Westminster government, not our establishment here in Wales. So I would just, it's been a brilliant discussion, and it's provided a lot of food for thought, and I've definitely got to really think through a lot of what you've said and about how WEN does our work. And I really appreciate you all taking the time and joining with us today. I did just want to update you on the statue of Betty Campbell that many of you may know is being built in Central Square. So this came about because a group of women got together and realised there was no statue of a woman outdoors in Cardiff, and in fact across the whole of Wales, not one statue of a named woman. And we worked with the Monumental Welsh Women, and we came up with a list of 100 Welsh women actually to celebrate the centenary of women getting the vote back in 2018. It's one of the first projects I did at WEN, and Gaynor Legall is on the list, as is Betty Campbell, and lots of other women, lots of other incredible women. And we got together with Monumental Welsh Women, the statue idea came about, and delighted that Betty got voted to have her statue put in Central Square. And it's full steam ahead. They hope to unveil the statue in June 2021. Unfortunately, there have been some delays. They were hoping to have it ready for International Women's Day 2021, but unfortunately that's not going to be possible. It is going to be an incredible statue. It's going to be 4 meters high. The main, I don't know, Rachel, you may well have seen sketches or the actual thing, what it's going to look like. The group, I know, don't want to kind of release pictures everywhere because they want it to be a surprise, but I am allowed to say, I've been told, it's going to be 4 meters high. Obviously, mainly it's going to be of Betty, but it's also going to feature other parts of her life and things that were important to her. And as soon as you come out of Cardiff Central Station, you're going to see that statue outside the BBC building, and it's going to make a real impact. The artist who's doing the statue is called Eve Shepherd, and she's internationally renowned. What I wanted to mention, and I know Megan has just put in the chat, and Rachel, do you want to say something before I say anything else? Go for it.
I can wait till you finish. Keep going. Go.
Oh, okay, so just to say that they're not, the Monumental Welsh Women aren't only wanting to do one statue, they want to do lots and lots of statues. And you can read more about them on the website that Megan's put up there. And they're also still looking for funding. And one of their ideas is, like, you know, if every woman in Wales, or every man and woman, but especially every woman in Wales put in £1, it would just make such a big difference. And they would have all the funding they needed. So this has been funded by Welsh Government as well, by the way, as well as private donations and so on. But I'd urge you to have a look at the website and get involved and donate if you can. Rachel.
Yeah, no, so I've seen, I can't really say too much about it, but I've seen a little bit of it. I think I can say that. And it what's really strange is how lifelike it is. And that sounds silly to say, but obviously she's no longer with us. So to see such a lifelike image, it's just wow. and Eve is fantastic. Like she spent a lot of time speaking with family members, and I know she spent a lot of time in the community centre to really get a flavour of what Nan was like very quickly. I thought I'd say that. But the last thing I'd like to say, and then I will go, is when I was speaking to somebody who recorded a conversation between myself and my cousin about our grandmother, and it went out on BBC Wales radio, was that what I hope is the statue going up is fantastic, and I'm not taking any of that away. It's great. She achieved a lot. Her legacy is still being lived out through hundreds of individuals across Wales and beyond. What I don't want for Wales is to think, great, job done, we've got it. And what I'm concerned about is Nan's statue being the marker for us doing great work and not having to reflect anymore, not having to question anymore, not having to have conversation and be open to dialogue anymore. I'm hoping that that's not an end point. I'm hoping it's the starting point. Because I think it's really easy for people to go, yeah, no, we've done it. Whoa, look, and we've got a statue to prove it. And obviously people who are here in this conversation today, I highly doubt whether or not that's going to be the conversation, because it won't be. But for general Welsh society and also British society, that is my fear. So I think that with the statue comes the responsibility to keep the conversation going, to keep the reflection going, and to remember that things have not always been easy and still are not easy, and we've got to do more to improve.
That's such a well-made point, Rachel, and such a fantastic point to end with, because I think absolutely, I mean, it's got to be the start. It's just like the bare minimum is one statue of an incredible inspirational woman like Betty, and that is absolutely just a start. And we all need to really make sure that we continue with her legacy, I think, don't we? And continue to work really hard to be anti-racist, actively anti-racist, and work hard. Can I just say also a huge thank you, diolch yn fawr iawn, to Race Council Cymru and Black History Wales 365 for collaborating with us over this event. It's been brilliant. We have recorded it, and we will make sure it gets a much bigger audience as well. I know a lot of people who wanted to be here but couldn't be here for various reasons. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Gaynor. Thank you, Humie. Thank you, Uzo, our wonderful chair, and big thank you to Rachel, Betty's granddaughter. So thank you very much, everyone. Have an amazing day, and we'll keep this conversation going, most definitely.